Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 7. Hope you are all doing well. I hope that you enjoyed the materials from last week. So you have started to learn about the British invasion, and you learned about the Beatles, who really kicked things off. And as I talked about in last week's video, really explained why the Beatles are truly the most important rock band that we've ever had, and probably will ever have, just because of so much groundbreaking that they did. And now all of those things have been broken down, or a lot of them largely. So their impact is profound. And then you learned about the Rolling Stones, and they're, as I explained last week, really two sides of the same coin. Very different bands doing very different things with different foundations, different roots, different directions. And so that's why you ended up things so diversely. Something else I didn't talk about was that with the Beatles, you had 4 songwriters, 2 main songwriters with Paul and John. But George and Ringo did some writing as well, and they all contributed. With the Stones, you had 2 songwriters. You had really Mick and Keith doing the bulk of the work there. And so that's why there's a more solidified sound to the Rolling Stones, where you get a lot more diversity within the Beatles. And then you're going to see, as we learn about the Kinks this coming week, they really had two songwriters, Ray and Dave Davies, brothers. And then with the Who, which you really had 1 songwriter. John Entwistle wrote a little bit, but really it was the vehicle for Pete Townsend. And so that's why the Who's sound is the most sort of unified in terms musically. So think about that as you're listening to the music. So what happened with the Beatles was that they really broke the doors wide open. Just like we saw Elvis do for a lot of other artists, both black and white, the Beatles did for British bands. And so you learned about the Stones, and then now we've got the Kinks and the Who and the Animals and Herman's Hermits and the Searchers and all these other bands that were able to break through. And what you had was basically with rock and roll, which was an American style of music. It was this American thing that came out of both black and white traditions that came together through the Beatles. It then becomes a global thing. And so you're going to start to now see it reach around the globe. And so it's pretty significant what they did. Something we didn't really talk about, and I think the book maybe mentioned a little bit. I talked about skiffle before, but as you get into this, you're going to learn a bit about what we call rockers and mods. Rockers were basically those English youth that were really into American rock and roll. So it was the jeans, leather jacket, t-shirt, motorcycles, that they had that James Dean, Elvis Presley look about them. And then you had the mods, and mod was short for modern. And with mods, you had suits and skinny ties and pork pie hats, Vespas, and they were into the more modern music. So they were listening to things like Motown and soul and R&B and the Beach Boys and other things. And so out of the Beatles came out of the rocker kind of thing. With the mods, the Kinks and the Who were very much connected to that. They listened to a lot of the current stuff that was going on here in the States with Motown and R&B and everything. So that's going to inform that music as well. So the doors break wide open for British bands, and they really start to take over. But I do want you to keep in mind, as we're going through the mid-60s and everything, that if you were to look at the charts, you would see the Beatles up there, and you would see the Stones up there, but you would also see Motown artists, and you would also see the Beach Boys. So really think about the fact that these groups that we're talking about right now, they're all happening at the same time. We're really still kind of deep in the heart of the 60s, although it'll straggle a little bit into the 70s here and there. But all of these things are happening all at the same time. It was an absolutely incredible time for music. I would say in terms of the musical diversity that was happening, you probably don't have a wider frame of it than this and into the 70s. And it really shifted after that. And I don't know if any of you watched the Grammys. I'm not a big fan of award shows, although I have friends that win the Grammys and things now and again. But one of the things that I was noticing, and my wife and I were talking about as it was going on, is really the lack of the diversity of the sounds. If you were to go back and listen to the artists just objectively, like don't watch them, don't do whatever. Musically, sonically, what you're hearing is very little variety. Where in the 60s and the 70s and on, you started to see a lot of change with that. So we're really into the 60s here. And so you're going to learn about these British bands, but then you're also going to learn about, the British blues revival. Now that is kind of a misnomer. It's not a British blues revival. What it is it's a British revival of American blues. So out of this scene, this was the roots that the Stones came out of. And then you're going to have these other groups that like John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and they were fanatics about American blues, and they wanted to play it faithfully and dutifully, and that's where Eric Clapton comes out of here. Fleetwood Mac actually was a blues band before. If you're familiar with the Fleetwood Mac of the 70s, that was not the original Fleetwood Mac of the 60s, headed up by Peter Green, which was very much a blues band. And I put a couple of videos in there so you could hear what they sounded like. You may actually even recognize some of these songs. But very different than what happened in the 70s when Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks came along, and Christine McVie, and really changed it into a pop, powerhouse band. So you have this revival of American blues, because American blues was gone. The artists couldn't, that were still around, and a lot of them were still around. People like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and folks like that, they were around, but nobody was really interested as R&B moved on. And what happened was the British reignited this hunger for American blues that then translated over here. All of a sudden, people were like, wait, there's a history here that we can go back to. We may not know of a lot of the blues artists, particularly people like Son House and Robert Johnson, if it weren't for the British really reviving all of that. So that's why I say it's a British revival of American blues. And then what that did was it opened doors here in the States for a new generation of blues artists. And out of that comes folks like Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix that were connected to that. And later, people like ZZ Top and Stevie Ray Vaughan and these other artists, George Thorogood, that sort of went, well, let's go back to this. Let's revive this here in the States. So you're going to learn about that as well. And you're also going to learn about power pop, which I add in. It used to be in older editions of the book, but I added in to fill that in for you. And you're also going to learn about sort of how did the American audiences, and particularly the American music business, respond when there was this takeover, at least it seemed that way, of British music. And there was a number of ways that they did that. Remember that back in the day, prior to the Beatles and Bob Dylan, you had songwriters and composers, and then you had artists that performed those songs. The Beatles and Dylan changed the landscape, because now it was about artists that could write their own songs and perform their own songs. And that was groundbreaking. The idea that a band would write their own songs, play them live, and record them themselves and not have studio musicians doing it was huge in the popular music world that the Beatles brought about and changed. And so the first reaction that the American music business had was like, we got to figure out a way to capitalize on this British thing. And that's where they created the Monkees. Now, if you're not familiar with the Monkees, you will be after this. But you probably know some of their music, whether you realize it or not. It's a misspelled, if you were spelling the animals, it would be Monkeys. They misspelled it or changed the spelling to Monkees. The Monkees, just like, the Beatles changed the bug from EETBEETLES to BEATLES. So you see all these little connections. They're pretty savvy folks out there. And it was really a fictitious band. The Beatles were never, the Monkees were never a real band. They were actors that auditioned and became a band. And they ended up becoming, or at least a TV band, and they became huge. In fact, there were times when they were outselling the Beatles and the Stones, and they were really a cultural phenomenon because TV drove that. We've talked about the role of TV in music, and we'll see that all the way through, up through MTV. After MTV, it really changed a bit, quite a bit. Now you could say MTV, not MTV, but YouTube has shifted that again into that visual media. But the Monkees were really quite profound. They became hugely popular, and they scored in that the person who auditioned for sort of the lead singer of the Monkees was a guy named David Jones. And David Jones happened to be British. He had a lot of the Beatles character and charisma. And so he became so big, and they became so big, that there was an artist at the same time over in England whose also his name was David Jones. And he had to change his name because the David Jones of the Beatles, of the Monkees, became so popular that the English David Jones had to change his name. Worked out okay for him because he changed his name to David Bowie and did fine as a career. And we'll learn about David Bowie down the line. So that's just part of the impact that the Monkees had. And so it really re-energized things over here in the States. You had these other bands, and then you had garage bands. So all of a sudden, here in the United States, people saw the Beatles and the Stones and these bands, and like, wait, we can form bands. And they would go buy guitars and drums and basses and amplifiers and PA systems, and they would start their own bands. And that's where the concept of the garage band comes from, is that basically bands were exploding all over the place, and they were rehearsing in their garages, and they, some would become big, some wouldn't. Louis, the song originally by Richard Berry, became a big hit through the Kingsmen, and you're going to learn a little bit about garage bands as well. So the impact of the Beatles in particular was not only profound with British artists, it became profound in re-energizing and igniting reigniting the music scene. Out of garage band is where you get punk and where you get grunge, and it all comes out of that. So it continues. That legacy of what happened with the Beatles is hugely significant. So I want you to think about that, because you're going to be asked a question this week about people saying, and there's a lot of people that say, the British really saved American rock and roll. And I'm going to give you a little heads up right now, because I want you to think about how the Beatles did that by those things that I just told you. As you go through the materials, as you read through the materials, you'll see how that happens. And then real quick, before I get into some other stuff, so your announcement reply for this week is that I want you to put your favorite Beatles song. Reply with your favorite Beatles song. Now, whether the Beatles may not be your favorite band, that's okay. That's fine. They're not my favorite British Invasion band, but I do love the Beatles, and I can't deny how their significance, and I love all their songs. I mean, their music is great. But so reply with your favorite Beatles song, and if you're like, well, I'm new to the Beatles, I never really was familiar with them before this, what Beatles song really stuck out to you? Was it that early Beatles, mid Beatles, late Beatles? But that's the thing to reply for your 10 points announcement. And again, that'll shut off on Thursday at noon. Okay, so I sent out the video last week because as I was doing grading, I caught some folks cheating again. I caught folks copying and pasting answers. These are pretty easy for me to find. It doesn't take a whole lot of work, but it's painful for me to find. I hate it because, first of all, I love music. I'm sure you get that by now. And so the thought that someone would want to cheat about music, especially popular music, is bizarre to me. Like that, it makes no sense whatsoever. Other than, I don't really care. It's a GE class. I just want to get a good grade and get out of it. But the problem is that if you get caught cheating, you're going to fail. And then if you get caught cheating again, you get reported to the college, and it becomes a really big deal. I give everybody a little bit of grace and mercy on the first time, but after that, then I take it to a whole new level. The other thing that just sort of concerns me is that maybe about 2/3 of the class actually even replied to that video. So that means 1/3 of the class hasn't even seen it, at least as of the time of me recording this, which is Sunday afternoon. And I put, important and all that sort of stuff. So please take the class seriously, take the work seriously. It's music, It's like this all relates to whatever you listen to. There are connections in here. There are things that are important socially and sociologically and musically and racially and all of these things that are going on because music happens in time, in history. It becomes history and it's relevant. One of the things that was missed a lot when I was doing the assignment about, the impact of black music in the 50s and the 60s was that quite a few people missed the impact of the civil rights movement and how the music influenced it and it influenced the music, and how significant that was, that when you had bands like the Temptations, who in 1965 are doing My Girl, this love song about my girl, and just a couple years later, in 68, I think it was, we're doing a song Cloud Nine about being poor in the ghetto with a dad who leaves because he's hooked on drugs and all this sort of stuff. That's significant. That's profound, and you should be able to get that by going through the materials. Now, I know that some of you aren't going through the materials, and then you're missing the important things about this class. And unfortunately, as I've said before, high school puts all this pressure that you've got to get a college degree. You don't have to get a college degree. And the important thing about what you get in college is not the degree. It's not the piece of paper. It's what you've learned along the way, as I said in the other video. So, if you want to go out and make money, be a plumber, be an electrician, there are a lot of ways to make a lot more money. I was reading an article not too long ago that talked about there are people that are in air conditioning work, HVAC work, some of them making over $200,000 a year. Never went to college, went to trade school, learned how to do it, built a company, and were making a really good living. So then why are you here? Why are you doing what you're doing? And I think that that's a really good question. And I think it's a good question probably for all of us to ask maybe once every year or so. Why are we doing what we're doing? Especially in light of the pandemic and everything that's going on and what's happening out there. And we see this little light in the future. So, I don't want to get all big and metaphysical and all those sort of things, but I think that it's a valuable exercise to say, why am I doing what I'm doing? What's the desired goal of this? And that's an important thing. And if your desired goal is, well, I want to get a good job, then you need to sort of figure out, well, what to you is a good job? Now, it could be a job that is rewarding personally or spiritually, or you're impacting the community. A good job could be making a lot of money. That's a question for you to answer. We've all got to approach that however we do. But are you on the path that's getting you to the goal that you want? And is it going to make you a better person? Is it going to make your community better? What's the goal there? So that's that. Take the work seriously. There's so much great music in here. Hopefully you're listening to the playlists. I know some people are coming in at the last minute and sort of thinking about what's the least amount of time that I could do this. But spend some time. Hit it early on so that you can get in there. If it were me, I would the first thing I would do after I watched the welcome video is I would, hit play on the playlist and start working through the book. And I would listen to all the music and take it in, because that's the world that it's coming out of. So I hope that helps. I really want you all to do well. And more importantly, I just want you to do well in life and to be good people doing good things. So here's where we got. You've gone through all the information and materials for this. The announcement thing. Next week, we'll switch gears again. We'll jump back in time to learn about folk music and folk rock and Bob Dylan and all that. And then we have spring break. Hooray! And there is no assignments over spring break. So I actually give you the spring break. But please be safe. Do what you need to do. There's a light at the end of the tunnel with this thing, but that's only if everybody does their part so that we can get there. So that's it. I know it was a long, rambly video, but, we're still under 20 minutes, and there's important information. And if I really kind of gave you the answer to one of your upcoming assignments in here. So that's it. Have a great week. The weather's beautiful. It's spring now. Take good care, and we'll see you soon. Bye.